Welcome to the Everyday Apostle, where ordinary lives meet extraordinary faith. Join our host, Kendall Peterson, as we explore how everyday men and women bring the gospel to life wherever they live, work, and play. Let's dive into it right now.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Everyday Apostle podcast. So overjoyed to be here with you guys today. This has been a real labor of love, making this happen, pulling all of this together, and so thrilled to be able to share it with you. This podcast is all about highlighting individuals who are living their faith in their daily lives, whether it's work, whether it's sports, in their families, wherever they are. And I am just thrilled to death. This has been a labor of love, and there are a lot of people that I would love to thank that have been an integral part in this. First of all, the community, Miami's community newspapers, who has offered us this space and this studio to get started. T3 Medical, or These Three Medical, who has sponsored this episode of the show. And my first guest, who so graciously said yes when asked. This is going to be such an honor to get to spend some time with him. So let me start with that introduction. Our guest today is a gentleman that I got to know a couple of years ago. He is a remarkable man of faith, a remarkable family man, businessman. Let me introduce to you Jorge Rodriguez, also known as Chiqui. Welcome, Chiqui, to the Everyday Apostle podcast.
Thank you, Kendall. Thank you for inviting me.
So I am starting a tradition, since this is the very first one. Everybody who joins me on the podcast is going to get a gift.
Wow.
So here's your gift, Chiqui.
Thank you.
It is what I'm wearing on my wrist right here.
Oh, how beautiful. Thank you
Saint
so
Benedict
much.
bracelet.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
And in our faith, we know how powerful Saint Benedict is. And I know I certainly need his intercession for me. So, so with that, let me start by introducing you through your bio. Jorge Rodriguez, or as he's more commonly known, Chiqui, is the Vice President of International Programs at Blue Missions. If you want to check out Blue Missions, it is bluemissions.org. Jorge is a double FIU grad with a bachelor's in electrical engineering and a global executive MBA. As an executive in his former position of 30 years, he led sales teams throughout Latin America, traveling to 45 countries on over 1,000 flights through his career. I guess that means you got a lot of frequent flyer miles.
Just a few.
Jorge left his executive role in the for-profit world to join Blue Missions and help scale operations to connect more communities in Latin America with access to clean water and sanitation, and to connect more volunteers with their purpose. He leads a team of 35 members between Miami and the Dominican Republic, encouraging each individual to develop further for the good of the mission. When he's not thinking about Blue, he's running. Actually, he thinks about Blue while he runs as well. And he is also serving in local faith ministries. To Chiqui, service is the key that unlocks your purpose. And I love that, and I think that sums you up perfectly. So let's dive right into it. Chiqui, where did you grow up?
My parents are Cuban, and I was born here in Miami. I was raised in Little Havana my first 10 plus years. And then as my parents were able to financially be a little more successful, they moved to the Westchester area, where I was raised for the next 20 years or so until I got married. So we live in the southwest area of Miami.
Okay. So you guys went uptown from Hialeah to...
Yeah, we improved a little bit, even though we love Little Havana.
What was your faith like growing up?
The way I like to remember it is my dad, I have a younger brother, and my dad would take my mom, my brother, and I to church on Sundays in Little Havana for probably the first 10 years of my life. And it was at that point where my dad had an encounter with the Lord. He went to a retreat that changed his life. And that's when he joined us as a full family of faith. And that was when we made the move to the Westchester area. We then participated at St. Timothy's Catholic Church for the rest of our lives, basically, even though I've been at St. Augustine for the last 5 years or so. St. Timothy's really became our hub as a family. And that's where we together as a family started practicing our faith, with my dad included.
Okay. So prior to that, prior to the conversion or that big experience for your father, was he just kind of the drop off and pickup guy, more or less?
Yeah, I mean, I was young, right? So for me, it was just normal. Dad would just drop off my mom and my brother and then hang out at the shopping center across from St. John Bosco in Little Havana.
Okay.
And that was just normal for us. And then obviously when he went to his retreat, what changed was suddenly we were having dinners and, prayers were taking place. So when I was 11, 12, 13 years of age, there was definitely God being brought more into the household. I was seeing how my father was also getting involved with Cursillos, which is the entity that, was his faith moment, that retreat. And I would see that he'd go back to these retreats or go back to these meetings. So as a young man, I saw my dad more involved, and he definitely was a person of action. My mom was a little more low key, more at home, but that typical pious female mom that would take us to mass, but she was more at the house with us, while my dad was maybe going to these meetings and participating more. He was more of an action person.
Okay. And so what did that do for your faith as you were growing up? What was your faith like?
Yeah, I went to Catholic high school. I went to a Marist school in Little Havana. Champagnat is the name. And, we were also being taught at school about our faith. And I have to say that, I was probably a pretty good kid most of the time. There's probably a lot of things that people don't know about the dark side of Chiqui. Maybe when he was a teenager. But I definitely walked I kind of walked that fine line between good and bad, like all of us, right? Where I knew there was a conscience I had to live up to, or maybe it was my dad, right? And from a discipline standpoint. But then I also did my things, right? I did the things that I also wanted to do that weren't right. And I could see myself going to those two sides. And it really wasn't until I graduated from high school at the age of 19 that I encountered a moment in my life of like being scared. Fearing the transition from high school to college was big for me, was a big shock. And my brother had started to go to these retreats called youth encounters, and he had invited me to go numerous times, and I never went. I never wanted to go. But I found myself in that moment of fear, in that moment of, even to some levels, maybe a mild depression that I felt I had, that maybe I should pay attention to this invitation. And that's when I went on my youth encounter I never forget the date, but it was January of 1983. And that's when I had my encounter with the Lord.
Okay.
And that changed my life.
So it was a profound encounter in that.
Yeah, it was. It basically, as I like to say when I explain this moment in my life, is it changed me from being a traditional Catholic to a practicing Catholic. Okay. It gave me a sense of responsibility. It was in meeting this, Savior, that I realized that now my job my role in life had a new added job description to it, which was to hopefully bring others to that Lord.
So what was the change? What did you start doing that you weren't doing before?
This is a time in my life when I also was in the process of getting my degree, eventually getting married, meeting my future wife, which happened in the same entity that I participated in my retreat. So I went to one encounter, which was all boys, and there was another encounter that was all girls. And God gifted me with my current wife, Nancy, which we've been married for 37 years already.
It's amazing.
And it was in that connection with having my encounter with the Lord, meeting my future spouse, that both of us felt the need to continue working in the church. So it became like a magnet. It was almost like the explanation of what my dad went through where he had his encounter and then he started to get involved in church. I had my encounter, met my wife or girlfriend at the time for 3 years, and then we both got very involved in church, and that started at the youth encounters.
Wow. That's amazing, and I think we'll hear a little bit more, but knowing the story and knowing you, being with somebody on the journey is pretty critical. And what a blessing to be able to do that with your wife, right? That's the strength of the marriage, the strength of the union, and the strength of the faith that comes out of that is undeniable.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. So then you went through college and you were active in your college years and all of that. And then probably another transition point, right? Just like going from high school to college, you then have to transition out of college into the real world, the big real world. Well, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I don't think we have enough time in this interview to go through everything, but I will tell you that what I just explained about that fear from high school to college became fear from single to married, fear from having a degree to having a job, and fear from being someone that didn't have children to having his first daughter. You know, those 3 chapters were very dramatic for me. Obviously, blessings, all of them, but still, fear was a big part of it, right? And there was those moments of the difficulty with the change, right? You know, and being single to being married. Not that I didn't love my wife, but it was just different. The fear of being in a secluded, safe place like the university to now being with an employer. I started traveling for the first time in my life. That was a big, difficult moment for me to leave my family, abandon them for, weeks at a time. And it turns out I did it for over 30 years. So, God has been good to us, both in, the fact that, I was gifted with these opportunities from a professional standpoint, but also gifted with the ability to deal with those difficulties, right? So God became a big mainstay in the process of dealing with those changes.
Tell me a little bit more about that. How exactly did you leverage your relationship with God in dealing with those pretty big events in your life?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that in one sense, you don't want to go through difficulties, right, in life. You want to avoid them. They hurt. They're difficult. They scare you. They create anxiety, depression, all sorts of things. But when you look back at them and you see how you had God next to you helping you during that process, it then helped deepen your relationship with God. And not so much as a dependency, but as a, real kind of understanding of his role in your life, in being with you in the good, in the bad, in the happy moments, in the not so happy moments. So it solidifies your relationship with your Lord, which I think a lot of people that maybe are struggling with their faith and maybe not understanding and maybe listening to this and saying, man, this guy met this God when he was 18, 19 and it changed his life. And it's hard to convey that to other people that maybe are, having a normal life, or a good life. So I have to say that there's a lot of good in the difficulty, right? Because it's when you're in that difficult situation that you have to struggle and try to figure out, how do I get out of this hole? How do I get out of this pit? My brother was inviting me to retreats for years. I didn't go. Why? Because my life was great. Right. And it wasn't until I feared and had difficulties that I said, maybe I should turn to that God he was talking about. And in doing that, I met him, right? Not only because he took me out of the hole or took me out of that situation, because the holes continued, right, in my life, but that he introduced me to that very special person in your life that we should all meet. And when we truly meet him, then we can say, wow, I've just found my best friend. And if you really believe that, blindly, then that best friend stays with you for the rest of your life. Hopefully, that's what we're working towards.
Right. Yeah. Right. So then you move into your professional life and you're traveling all over the world and you're collecting frequent flyer miles and that's a struggle in itself, right? Time away from your family and you're having kids and all of that. Why don't you talk briefly about, your kids and who you have in the Rodriguez tribe?
Yeah. So I have 3 children. Nikki, who's the oldest, she's 36. Danny, who's the middle child, he's going to be turning 34 in a couple of months. And Camila, who's my youngest, and she's 26. Nicole, all three are married, but Nicole, my oldest, is the one that's been married for 10 years now. And I have 4 beautiful granddaughters who are the biggest joy in my life right now. So I try to steal as much time from, Blue Missions, my wife, and everything to try to spend more time with them. So that's a challenge on its own, right? Trying to balance that new situation. But yeah, I've got 3 beautiful children. I know we'll talk about it a little bit more, but my boss is my son, where I work at today. He is the founder of that organization, and along with my daughter, who was the co-founder when it first started.
That's amazing story. So let's kind of get into that. So you've got a 30-year career in sales in Latin America. By all accounts, successful, I would imagine. And then one day, you get offered an opportunity.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to try to explain it correctly, our family started to do mission trips to the Dominican Republic when my children were in high school. So Nikki was 16 when I first took her on a mission trip with a nonprofit called LIFO Missions. And 2 years later, I took my son Danny when he was 16 on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic. Eventually, Camila, who was the youngest, went on a mission trip when she was also in high school. So our entire family, through a certain span of years, was able to start doing this missionary work in the Dominican Republic. Little did we know that my 2 oldest children would fall in love with the country, with the mission, to the extent where they founded the nonprofit Blue Missions 14 years ago. Danny was 19, Nicole was 21. So this Blue Mission started flowing. My wife and I, would support the mission in everything we could, participating in the gala, making our regular donations, always hearing the stories from Danny, more specifically, who stayed on as an employee of Blue while my daughter got married and things like that. My daughter is part of the board. But we would just be kind of innocent bystanders, big supporters of Blue Missions. And it was one day about 5 years ago that Danny had asked both my wife and I to help him interview different people for 2 different positions that he had open. One of which was a growth manager, someone that would come in and help out with growth for the organization, both on the trip side as well as on the fundraising side. And we helped him out with these interviews and eventually got to the point where we were going to select some candidates. I gave him my opinions on who were the proper candidates. He made an offer, and the candidate just said no. He wasn't interested anymore in the job. So Danny one day, came back, and I think it was maybe a couple of days after this happened, and I told him, I said, Danny, let's just look for more resumes, right? Let's just start again, right? You just start this process. And he said, no, Dad. He said, I think you're the right person for this job. Wow. I was 55 years old at that point. And I said, Danny, are you crazy? I did use some choice words that we can't use on this podcast with the "are you crazy?" And I said, your mom and I are now just starting to plan our retirement.
Right.
Now all 3 of you are out of the house, and we're spending a lot, less on you guys, so we get to save a little bit. And he said, Dad, I think you're the right guy, and
that must have been unbelievably powerful to hear that your son wanted you to join him in the organization and thought you were the right thing, but also scary at the same moment. Another scary transition ahead of you.
Yeah, I said to myself I wasn't going to cry in this interview. But the thing he said was that really got to me was he said, Dad, you've always taught me that money wasn't the most important thing in your life. So He's a sharp kid, right? He knew where to get me. And it's so true though, right? So I gave him the rebuttal, right, on, your mom and I are trying to save, for retirement, and he hits me back with, money's not the most important thing. And he also knows that I love mission, right? That I love this whole thing. So I said, Danny, we'll pray about it. I'll talk to your mom about it. And eventually, we came to the conclusion that this was okay to make this move.
Mm-hmm.
It has been challenging because at the end of the day, your finances do change when you move from a corporate world to a nonprofit world. And, those plans you might have on saving and things like that, might take a different, format, and we're still working on it as we speak, with my wife, trying to make sure everything flows well. But thank God everything's gone well, and I feel so blessed. I feel so blessed to be working in an environment where we are serving others who are immediately serving us back, right? And that's like an eternal circle of, service that kind of feeds you more than you feed it, right? And then, the dynamic of working with your son is also interesting. It's a topic on its own, right? But it's really a blessing to be able to be with someone that, at such a young age just, saw the light, right? The light of service, and be able to practice it, right? In his demeanor and the way he manages the team and the way he runs the organization. So, I feel very blessed, to be in this situation.
So that's a big change, and it's unbelievable how somebody can make that change and make that decision, and yeah, he knew the right words to get you, obviously. Tell me a little bit about how Jesus fit into that decision-making process, and how you relied on your walk and all of your faith and everything else about that relationship that was key to making that decision.
Yeah. It was an obvious fit, not necessarily easy because of the financial strains that we kind of put on ourselves, right? In this society where you're always planning ahead and everything gets planned and all that kind of stuff. But in our faith journey, my wife and I, we've been involved with many ministries and worked with many ministries, whether it's the youth early on when we were together as boyfriend and girlfriend, eventually with, marriage retreats when we were, in our early stages of marriage. Fast forward 37 years and, Arlene and you and Nancy and I are involved now and fully engaged at St. Augustine, which is marriage prep again. So it comes back again, even in your own life as ministries coming and going. In the middle of that, I was very involved for about 20 years with prison ministry, an ecumenical organization called Kairos. And those were probably the most amazing retreats I ever have gone to, and life-changing retreats inside an institution, dealing with people that have, as close as you can, zero hope for their lives, and seeing those transitions. So going to the Dominican Republic and doing that mission work that we see on TV, right, where you go to another country and do something, was a bucket list item I had when I took my children. I took them as much as I wanted to take myself, because it was another thing that I wanted to live in my experience. So then coming to a point where you can actually work at a nonprofit and make it your 9 to 5, but really like 24/7, was an amazing opportunity as well, right? Because in corporate world, even though I loved my job in the corporate world and Jesus was in it as well, this was a more obvious fit, right? Where what you're doing is what, you are actually doing what Jesus would want you to do.
More direct service.
It's much more direct in every sense. The people you're serving, the people you're working with, the mission on its own is godly. And whether you call it Catholic or don't call it Catholic, it's serving your fellow man. Right. And that's what we get to do 24/7. So
it's amazing.
You can't complain.
It's a great segue into, man, I wish this could be a 3-hour podcast. I really do. So I have one final question for you, just to kind of wrap all of that up. I heard years ago but a challenge. And that was, if you were on trial for being Christian, is there enough evidence to convict you? Now, I would certainly convict you just based on what I heard here, but I also know you. And I think that's a great question. That's something I think about a lot, right? Is there enough evidence to convict me? There hasn't always been. And I'm sure you've had moments in your life where that could be in question. But generally speaking, I think you've done a remarkable job with that. What advice could you give to the people listening or watching that on how they could be more convictable?
Well, first of all, I hope you'd be on the jury to help with that conviction. But I think the answer is, I don't know. I hope so. I really hope so. But having said that, I know all the evidence because I know myself. Mm-hmm. So I know the good stuff that we've done, right, and I know the not so good stuff that I have done and continue to do, and it's wrong. So for that, I thank God for our sacrament of reconciliation, right? It helps reset that. But I do want to highlight something that's a big part of my life, which is my group of formation. I've been together with a group of 8 men for the last 20 plus years, where we meet. Initially, it was twice a month. Now we're doing it once a month. But this is a group of men that we're all striving to be better Christians. We're all striving to keep Jesus first in our lives. That's our mantra. Mm-hmm. We're all striving to build our house on rock. That is, our main reflection, when that group got started. And it's through that community that you're able to maintain, your walk towards Jesus, right? Your walk towards that proper conviction of being a good Christian. So if I'm messing up, as good as, Chiqui could be on the outside and he's Blue Missions and wow, how wonderful, and look at that great family he has. He also has a downside. But guess what? Every 2 weeks or every month, I have to sit down and do an accountability study with my brothers. And if I'm really honest, I have to say, hey, look, I screwed up. What do you guys think? Right? And they're the ones that pull me out. So I've been gifted that. That is a blessing to be with that group that started many years ago. And these 7 men, you interview them and they are perfect examples, or better examples than I am in being able to show others how to live a life as a Christian.
It's amazing. We are almost out of time, and I wish we had more. Thank you, Chiqui. Thank you so much for your honesty and for living a life of example. I am very, very grateful that it was you that was here for this very first one. I would love to thank Miami's community newspapers for this location, these 3 Medical for their sponsorship of this episode, and for Rachel, our producer, who has put everything into making this possible, because I certainly couldn't have done it. And over and above all of that, I would like to thank God for this opportunity to sit and to profess our love of Him and His love of us. So with that, everybody listening, please continue your journey with Christ and have a wonderful week. Amen.
Thanks for tuning in to The Everyday Apostle. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, on your favorite podcast outlet, and at our website at everydayapostle.com. Until next time, stay blessed.